You're listening to the Shaughnessy Group podcast, insights on buying, selling, and growing Canadian businesses in the lower middle market. Let's begin.
Okay, let's unpack this. Imagine you're the owner, right? You've built this successful Canadian company, maybe doing somewhere between, say, $10 million and $50 million a year in revenue. It could be manufacturing, logistics, tech distribution, doesn't really matter the sector. Point is, this business, it's probably the biggest single asset your family owns. It's your life's work, sitting right there.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating here and where things often start isn't you deciding, okay, time to sell. No, it usually kicks off with what we call the unsolicited opportunity.
Well,
Suddenly, you get a call. Maybe it's your biggest competitor or a major supplier, maybe even a key customer. Sometimes it's your own senior management team knocking on the door talking about a buyout.
and that call, it's like a lightning strike, isn't it?
Yeah.
On one hand, it's flattering while someone sees the value, but then almost immediately there's this wave of, well, maybe panic.
Yeah.
You realize you're about to negotiate the biggest deal of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And the person on the other end, they likely have whole teams for this stuff. M&A pros, lawyers, deep pockets.
Exactly right. And the very first thought, the big temptation for the owner is almost always, okay, I can handle this myself. I'll talk to them directly, save on advisor fees. They think that fee money, it just drops straight to their bottom line.
Makes sense on the surface. Cut out the middleman.
But all the data, particularly for these lower middle market deals, it just screams, don't do it. It's the classic penny wise, pound foolish scenario. You might save a bit on fees, but you risk leaving millions, literally millions, on the table.
Right. So our mission today in this deep dive is really to get you, the owner, up to speed quickly on this.
Okay.
How do you take that initial unsolicited approach and actually use it to your advantage? How do you build leverage, create a competitive situation, and really maximize the value instead of letting that first call actually undermine your position?
And the core concept we really need to drill down on is this measurable impact of bringing in experts. Skilled M&A advisors, consistently, the studies show this, they add a value uplift of around 1.25 times the business's EBITDA.
Okay, EBITDA. Let's just quickly define that for anyone listening who's maybe, running the factory floor or managing distribution, not crunching finance numbers all day.
Good point. So, EBITDA, it stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. Think of it as a proxy, a standard global measure, really, for the core cash flow your business generates from its operations before all the financing and accounting stuff kicks in.
So when you say adding 1.25 EBITDA,
Yeah.
we're not talking small change here.
Not at all. We're talking about generating a significant quantifiable premium on top of what the business might be worth on a standalone basis. It's a strategic value boost.
So if you're that Canadian owner sitting on this incredibly valuable asset, understanding how that premium gets created, how these competitive dynamics actually work,
Well, it seems essential.
it's everything because it boils down to leveraging a very powerful corporate emotion,
Yeah.
fear, specifically the fear of loss. And orchestrating that's a strategic game. And frankly, it's a game you probably want an expert playing on your behalf. Okay, fear. Let's dig into that. You're saying leverage in these deals comes from making bidders feel like they have to win.
Precisely. It's not just about finding someone willing to pay a decent price. It's about creating an environment, a controlled process where multiple bidders feel this urgent, almost existential need to put their absolute best offer forward. They're driven by the fear of what happens if they don't get the deal.
So it's less about finding purely opportunistic buyers looking for a bargain and more about identifying parties who see losing your company as a genuine threat to their own future.
That's exactly it. That compulsion, that defensive posture, that's what drives the price significantly higher than a simple financial valuation might suggest. You find those parties, you understand their fears, you have leverage.
And you mentioned there are typically four main types of stakeholders whose fears can be leveraged in this lower middle market space.
Yes, consistently we see these four groups emerge in a well-run process. An effective M&A strategy doesn't just focus on one, it identifies and strategically targets all four to create this multi-layered competitive tension.
All right, let's break these down. This feels like where the strategy really starts to take shape for the seller. First up, the obvious one. Rivals. Competitors, what's their core driver?
For rivals, your business isn't just another company, it's a strategic asset. It could be your unique technology, maybe specific patents you hold. Think about, say, a Canadian equipment manufacturer doing $25 million a year. Maybe they've got some key industrial patents or exclusive distribution rights in a really important niche market.
Okay.
So if a rival comes knocking, they're not just buying your past profits. They're buying future market dominance. They're buying your tech, your market access, maybe your key customer relationships.
And the fear for them.
It's huge, right? If they don't buy it.
Exactly. If they don't get you, their other main competitor might.
Yeah.
And suddenly that competitor has your patents, your distribution, your market share. That could completely shift the balance of power in the industry, maybe for the next 5-10 years.
Yeah.
It's a massive defensive risk for them. So they're essentially forced to bid higher, maybe much higher than their initial spreadsheet model told them to, just to stop the worst-case scenario.
That's the textbook fear-driven bid. They pay a premium not just for the acquisition, but for strategic insurance, to prevent their competitor from becoming an unbeatable giant. That urgency, that desperation, that's pure leverage for the seller.
Okay, that makes total sense. Paying a premium to block a rival. Now, the second group you mentioned, this one's less intuitive for a seller negotiating alone. Major suppliers, how do they fit in?
Yeah, this often surprises owners. Think about companies, maybe large national outfits, maybe even international ones, who sell to your business. And maybe your business represents a really significant chunk of their revenue. Let's take a Canadian supplier selling ingredients or components to a, say, $30 million food processing business. Your orders might be critical to that supplier's plant utilization or their regional profitability.
So the supplier isn't thinking about taking over the food processing operations themselves.
Not usually, no. Their motivation is almost entirely defensive. It's about protecting their existing revenue stream, protecting that key account relationship they have with you.
What's the fear then?
The fear is simple. What happens if someone else buys your company? Especially if it's a big multinational player or maybe even your competitor who already has strong relationships with a different supplier. The new owner could come in and just switch vendors overnight. Poof. That multi-million-dollar account vanishes.
Wow, losing that could be devastating for the supplier.
It could be an existential threat to that supplier's specific division, or maybe even their entire Canadian operation, depending on the scale. So this protective fear, this need to secure their revenue, is often powerful enough to make them step up and put in a serious high-value bid. Even if M&A isn't their usual game, they become a bidder purely out of self-defense.
That's fascinating. And it's a dynamic that an owner, trying to handle talks one-on-one would likely miss entirely. They wouldn't think to call their main supplier and say, hey, heads up, my rival's sniffing around. Are you worried? Want to make an offer?
Absolutely not. It requires a professional, structured approach to even bring them into the conversation credibly. Which leads us to the third group, kind of the mirror image, major customers.
Right. The ones buying from you.
Exactly. These are businesses heavily reliant on your products or services. Your output is a critical input for their supply chain.
Let's use an example. Maybe a big North American retailer that depends heavily on a, say, $15 million Canadian sustainable packaging company for all their eco-friendly product lines.
Perfect example. That retailer's motivation for potentially bidding on your packaging company is all about supply chain security, risk mitigation. They are terrified of disruption. What happens if one of their retail competitors buys your packaging business? Or even some unrelated private equity firm?
Their supply could be cut off, or prices could skyrocket, or maybe the new owner prioritizes other customers.
Precisely. Their critical supply chain is suddenly vulnerable. So they might bid, and bid strongly, simply to secure that stability, to control the source of those crucial eco-friendly packages. That need for security, for predictability, it's another powerful driver for offering a premium price and, importantly, maybe even more flexible terms.
So just to recap, the rival bids to prevent being dominated, the supplier bids to protect their revenue stream, and the customer bids to protect their supply chain stability. All driven by fear, by defense.
You've got it. All defensive needs, not just opportunistic growth plays. And that brings us to the fourth key group, which is often really important for the seller personally, especially regarding the company's future culture. And it's very common in this market segment. That's the key management team leading what's called a management buyout, or MBO.
Ah, yes. The senior execs, the VP of
Yeah.
sales, the head of ops, the people who maybe been with the owner for years, help build the company.
Exactly. Their fear is often deeply personal. They worry about losing their jobs under a new owner. They worry about the company culture they helped create being destroyed, especially if, say, a big impersonal private equity firm comes in with a completely different playbook. Or maybe they just fundamentally disagree with the strategic direction an outside buyer might take.
So they decide to take control themselves.
They band together. They want to protect their roles, their vision, their future. Now, they usually don't have the millions needed sitting in their bank accounts. So what they do is team up with a private equity firm, often one that specifically specializes in backing management buyouts. The PE firm provides the capital, the structure, and the deal expertise, and the management team brings the intimate operational knowledge, the continuity, which makes their bid highly credible and often very efficient to execute.
Okay, so 4 distinct groups, each with a different fear driving them. Rivals fearing lost dominance, suppliers fearing lost contracts, customers fearing lost supply, and management fearing lost jobs and culture.
Exactly. And a skilled M&A advisor doesn't just stumble upon these bidders. They systematically identify them, understand their specific fears, and then professionally engage all 4 types. That's how you create the environment where that fear of loss is maximized across the board. That intense, multifaceted competition, that is the engine that generates the 1.25 Mike EBITDA premium we talked about.
You're not just negotiating with one interested party anymore. You're orchestrating a competition among bidders who need your business for fundamentally different, often quite urgent reasons.
Precisely. It changes the entire dynamic from a simple negotiation to a strategic option.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for the owner listening, because now we need to connect this strategy directly to the money. Let's talk hard numbers, the math behind this premium. Because, let's be honest, seeing a potential 6-figure fee from an M&A advisor, that sticker shock is real. It's often the main reason owners are tempted to go it alone.
It absolutely is. And that's why the statistics are so important, because they directly counter that temptation. The data from numerous studies looking specifically at deals in this lower middle market consistently shows that using a skilled full-service M&A advisor adds, on average, about 1.25 times the business's annual EBITDA to the final enterprise value. That's the measurable uplift delivered by running a competitive process versus a simple one-off negotiation.
Right. And for the businesses we're talking about, these $10 million to $50 million revenue Canadian companies, what does their typical EBITDA look like?
Generally, you're looking at EBITDA somewhere in the range of, say, $1 million on the lower end, up to maybe $5 million for the larger companies in that bracket.
Okay, so do the math for us. That 1.25x multiplier, what does it mean in actual dollars added?
It means the added financial value, the premium generated by the advisor's process, is typically between $1.25 million.
And the $1 million EBITDA business.
Exactly. And it scales up. For the business doing $5 million in EBITDA, you're looking at an additional $6.25 million in enterprise value. That's a huge tangible return, directly resulting from having that structured, competitive process in place.
We absolutely need a concrete example here to make this crystal clear. Let's take a hypothetical but realistic company, maybe specialized logistics firm, solidly in the middle. Let's say it generates $3 million in annual EBITDA.
Okay, good example. A $3 million EBITDA business. If the advisor runs the process effectively, leverages those stakeholder fears we discussed, and achieves that typical 1.25x premium, well, $3 million EBITDA times 1.25, that's $3.75 million. That's $3.75 million in additional value created compared to what the owner likely would have gotten just negotiating directly with that first unsolicited buyer who maybe offered a standard baseline multiple.
Okay, $3.75 million in extra value.
Yeah.
Now let's hit the objection head on. The fees. What would the advisor's fee typically look like on a deal like this? Let's assume a standard structure, maybe something like the Lehman formula.
Right. The Lehman formula is common. Those structures vary. It's a sliding scale. Typically, it might be something like 5% on the first $1 million of the sale price, then 4% on the second million, 3% on the third, 2% on the fourth, and then maybe 1% on the rest of the value above that.
So it incentivizes the advisor to get the highest price, because their percentage is highest on the initial value chunks.
Exactly. The structure aligns the advisor's interests with the seller's maximize the total deal value. So, let's say that $3 million EBITDA business, through this competitive process, ultimately sells for $20 million. That's a reasonable multiple, around 6.7x EBITDA achievable in a structured sale.
Okay, $20 million sale price. What's the Lehman fee roughly?
On a $20 million deal, using that 5-4-3-2-1 structure, you're probably looking at a total fee somewhere in the neighborhood of, let's say, $230,000 to $250,000. Maybe a bit more, depending on the exact structure, but that's the ballpark.
Okay, so now we compare. A fee of roughly $230,000 versus $3.75 million in added value.
The comparison is stark. The fee isn't just an expense, it's an investment. It's the cost required to unlock that significantly larger return. The transaction costs, viewed in this light, are more than justified. They are frankly a rounding error compared to the value uplift. The focus for the owner has to shift. It's not about minimizing the advisor fee, it's about maximizing the net proceeds from selling their family's most important asset.
But hang on, let me play devil's advocate, because I know owners worry about this. What if the advisor runs this whole process, creates the materials, contacts buyers, and then the deal falls apart? No sale happens. Does the owner still owe that $230,000?
That's a critical point, and it goes to how reputable advisors structure their engagements. The vast majority of that fee, the $220K or whatever it is a success fee. It's contingent. It only gets paid if and when the deal actually closes and the seller gets their money. There might be a smaller upfront retainer, maybe to cover some initial work and out-of-pocket expenses like creating the marketing materials or setting up the data room. Perhaps a modest monthly fee for a set period. But the big payment, the bulk of the compensation, is tied directly to achieving a successful sale.
So the advisor is highly motivated to actually get the deal done at the best possible price, because that's how they get paid their main fee. Their skin is firmly in the game alongside the owners.
Precisely. The incentives are aligned. You're essentially buying expertise, a process, and insurance against leaving money on the table, but you're primarily paying for the result.
Okay, that significantly de-risks it for the owner, knowing they aren't on the hook for a massive fee if things somehow don't work out.
It should. It makes the decision to hire an advisor based on the potential upside, not just the upfront cost.
All right, so we've established the potential upside. Now let's flip back to the owner who doesn't hire the advisor. The one tempted to save that $230,000 and negotiate directly with that first caller. You mentioned this is where the risks really start to stack up. Let's detail those pitfalls. You called it trying to be an M&A expert overnight.
And experienced buyers, whether they're sophisticated private equity groups or corporate development teams at larger companies, they can spot an owner operating outside their depth almost immediately. And unfortunately, they often exploit it.
Okay, risk number one you highlighted was perceived unprofessionalism. How does negotiating alone signal weakness or desperation?
Well, imagine the owner starts juggling calls. They're talking to the rival who first approached them, then maybe they call a supplier, testing the waters, then they reach out to a customer. Without a central coordinator, without a clear, structured process, it just looks messy. It can come across as disorganized, naive, or even worse, like the owner is desperate to sell to anyone.
And how does that perception hurt them?
Sophisticated buyers thrive on that lack of structure. If they sense the seller doesn't have professional control over the process, they feel comfortable lowballing. They'll offer less because they don't perceive any real competitive threat or professional management of the sale. An advisor brings immediate credibility. Their structured process signals seriousness and forces buyers to engage properly from day one.
So right off the bat, you're likely starting from a lower offer point.
Okay.
Risk number two is linked to that lack of control. Mistrust among competing parties.
Yes, this is a huge danger in a DIY sale process. Let's say the owner is talking directly to competitor A, then somehow competitor A finds out the owner is also having serious discussions with, say, major supplier, be someone competitor, might not even view as a legitimate buyer in the traditional M&A sense.
What happens then?
Suspicion flares up immediately. Competitor A starts thinking, is this seller just playing games? Are they trying to manipulate me using this supplier? Is this whole process unprofessional or maybe even dishonest?
And the result of that suspicion?
Serious professional buyers, the ones likely to pay top dollar, hate perceived chaos or manipulation. They're used to clean, fair processes run by investment banks or M&A firms. If they sense the process is rigged, amateurish, or just plain weird, they'll often just walk away. They won't waste their time and resources. And when those serious bidders withdraw, your competitive tension evaporates. Poof! There goes that 1.25 by EBITDA premium. An advisor acts as that neutral professional buffer, ensuring fairness and maintaining trust.
Which leads straight into the seller's worst nightmare, risk number three. The risk of collusion or reduced competition. This sounds like the owner completely losing control.
It is. When you have direct, unsupervised conversations happening between the seller and multiple bidders, the risk that those bidders start talking to each other goes way up. Imagine the supplier and the customer from our earlier examples. They both realize they're talking directly to the same business owner who clearly doesn't have an advisor managing communications.
They might think, hey, instead of bidding against each other and driving the price up,
why don't we work together?
Exactly. They might implicitly or even explicitly coordinate. Maybe they agree to put in lower parallel offers. Maybe they even discuss carving up the business after one of them buys it cheaply. They effectively kill the auction dynamic that the seller needs to maximize value.
How does an advisor prevent that?
Through controlled communication. Advisors run managed auctions where bidder identities are often kept confidential from each other, at least initially. All communication flows through the advisor. Strict protocols are enforced. The advisor acts as a firewall, ensuring each bidder feels the pressure of competition. They know others are interested, but without allowing them the opportunity to collude.
Okay, so those are the risks related to managing the buyers. But what about the internal pressure on the owner? Risk number 4, overwhelm and missteps. This is huge. Remember, the owner still has a business to run. Day-to-day operations don't stop just because someone wants to buy the company. Now, on top of that, they're trying to manage M&A, responding to endless due diligence requests, financials, legals, operational details, trying to understand complex legal documents like the letter of intent or the purchase agreement, negotiating terms, assessing tax implications. It's intensely demanding. It requires specific expertise that most business owners simply don't have and frankly shouldn't be expected to have. They're experts in their industry, not in structuring multi-million-dollar transactions.
And being overwhelmed leads to mistakes.
Inevitably. Missing key negotiating points. Agreeing to unfavorable terms on things like reps and warranties just to get the deal done. Failing to structure the deal tax efficiently. All of it leads to lost value, sometimes significant value left on the table simply due to exhaustion or lack of specific knowledge.
And while they're overwhelmed and trying to share all this information, risk number 5 becomes critical. Confidentiality breaches.
Absolutely. When the owner is directly sending sensitive company data, customer lists, supplier contracts, pricing details, proprietary process information, future financial projections without the rigorous controls an advisor puts in place, the risk of leaks is massive. You need robust non-disclosure agreements, NDAs, secure virtual data rooms, and a carefully managed process for information release.
What if the deal falls through after sensitive info has been shared?
That's the nightmare. Deals fall apart all the time, even well-run ones. If your confidential data has leaked out to competitors, suppliers, or customers during a failed DIY sale process, it can seriously damage your ongoing business. It can erode trust, compromise your competitive position. Advisors manage this tightly. Strict confidentiality is paramount throughout their process.
Okay, so unprofessionalism, mistrust, collusion, overwhelm, confidentiality, breaches. It paints a pretty bleak picture for going it alone. Which brings us to risk number 6, which really just sums it all up. Lost value.
It's the bottom line, isn't it? Trying to save that $230,000 advisor fee, in our example, directly leads to losing out on potentially millions, that $3.75 million premium or more. It's a false economy, penny wise, pound foolish. The cost of not having expert guidance when selling your most valuable asset almost always vastly outweighs the fee saved. You simply don't achieve the maximum possible value.
Okay, the risks are clear. The potential upside of using an advisor is clear. So let's pivot. For the owner who gets that unsolicited call and decides, okay, I need help, what does the advisor actually do? How do they take that initial spark and orchestrate this controlled auction you've described? What are the steps to actually generate that competitive pressure and get that higher price?
Right. The advisor's value isn't magic. It's in executing a disciplined strategic process. They take that first call, which might have come with a perfectly reasonable but likely suboptimal offer, maybe 5 times EBITDA, and they use that initial interest as the catalyst to systematically extract the maximum value by leveraging all those potential bitter fears we identified.
So, step 1 must be figuring out who else to talk to. Identifying strategic bidders.
Exactly. And it's much more than just pulling a generic list of PE firms that buy companies in your sector. The advisor first analyzes the initiating party. Was it the rival, the customer? Why are they interested? What's their specific strategic angle? Then they build out a carefully curated list of additional potential buyers. This includes other rivals, key suppliers, key customers, potential MBO backers, maybe even relevant players from adjacent industries. And crucially, for each potential bidder, the advisor develops a hypothesis about their unique motivation and their specific existential risk or strategic need. Is this buyer desperate for our patents? Does that one need to protect a massive contract? This tailored understanding is key.
Okay, so you know who to target and why they might pay a premium. Step 2 is then crafting the story, positioning the business.
Precisely. It's about narrative control, tailored for maximum impact with each specific buyer type. The advisor creates a detailed pitch book, usually called a confidential information memorandum or CIM. It highlights the company's strengths, growth opportunities, and financial performance. But, and this is critical, the emphasis and the angle of the pitch are subtly adjusted for each key bidder category. For the rival, it might emphasize market share gain and competitive lockout. For the customer, it stresses supply chain security and indispensability. For the MBO Team TE backers, it might focus on continuity and untapped operational efficiencies. It's customized persuasion.
You're speaking directly to their fears and aspirations. Okay, step 3 sounds crucial for avoiding the chaos of DIY. Structuring a controlled auction. Setting the rules.
Absolutely vital. This is where the professionalism comes in, the part that commands respect from serious buyers. The advisor implements a clear, structured, multi-round process. There are defined deadlines for initial indications of interest, for follow-up bids, for final offers. These timelines aren't suggestions, they're firm. This creates urgency. It prevents buyers from dragging their feet or trying to play games. It forces them to put their best foot forward within the defined timeframe.
And how is confidentiality maintained?
Through rigorous protocols. Secure online data rooms where approved bidders can access information under strict NDAs. Standardized Q&A processes, usually managed solely through the advisor. Limited direct contact between bidders and the seller, especially early on. The structure ensures Party A knows Party B and Party C are also seriously looking, which fuels competition, but it prevents collusion and manages information flow tightly.
Got it. Now, step 4 sounds like the real art. Amplifying existential risks. Turning up the heat psychologically.
Yes, this is where the strategic finesse really comes into play. It's not passive bid collection. The advisor actively manages the communication and the psychology of the auction. They subtly reinforce the potential negative consequences for each bidder if they don't win the deal. Maybe reminding a rival implicitly of the market share they stand to lose. Highlighting potential supply chain vulnerabilities to a customer bidder. Emphasizing the strategic fit that makes the asset uniquely valuable to them. This careful amplification of their specific fear or strategic need is what pushes bidders beyond their initial comfort zone and motivates them to offer that premium price, the 1.25 by EBITDA uplift, to eliminate their perceived risk.
It's about making them feel they cannot afford to lose.
Yeah.
Okay, and the final step, step 5, goes beyond just the price tag. Negotiating holistic deal terms.
Absolutely. The headline price is obviously critical, but a great deal involves much more than that. An expert advisor protects the seller on all fronts. This means negotiating favorable terms on crucial elements like representations and warranties, R&W, the seller's promises about the business. You want tight limits on your post-sale liability, what we call caps and baskets on indemnification. It might involve structuring earnouts, where the seller gets additional payments post-closing if the business hits certain performance targets, letting you share in future upside. And it definitely involves defining the seller's post-sale role, if any. How long do you need to stay? What are your responsibilities? Ensuring the transition plan aligns with your personal goals, whether that's a clean break or continued involvement. Getting these terms right minimizes headaches and risks for the seller long after the check has cleared.
Okay, that 5-step process. Identify bidders, position the business, structure the auction, amplify risks, negotiate a trip. Holistically makes it very clear how an advisor systematically builds value and manages risk. Let's make it even more concrete. Let's talk about that Canadian case study you mentioned earlier, the manufacturing company. How did this play out in the real world?
Right. This is a great illustration. We had a Canadian manufacturing company, privately owned, doing about $25 million in revenue, generating a solid $3 million in annual EBITDA. And critically, the whole thing started exactly as we discussed, an unsolicited approach. In this case, from one of their main competitors.
Okay, and the owner could have just negotiated with that competitor, right? Maybe got a decent offer, say, based on a standard multiple, perhaps around $25 million, maybe a bit less.
Possibly. That would have been the easy path. But instead, they engaged an M&A advisor. And the advisor immediately implemented that 5-step process we just outlined. They didn't just negotiate with the first caller.
So what did the advisor do? Who did they bring into the auction?
They built a multi-pronged competitive landscape. They brought in other competitors, playing on their fear of losing out on the company's key patents and market position. They strategically engaged major suppliers, highlighting the risk to their contracts if a competitor bought the business. They approached key customers, emphasizing the need for supply chain stability. And importantly, they facilitated the formation of a management buyout team, who then secured private equity backing to make a credible bid, driven by their desire to protect their roles and the company culture.
Wow. So all 4 fear factors were in play. Rivals, suppliers, customers, and management. That must have created some serious competitive heat.
Intense competition, exactly as designed, and the financial result.
What was the final sale price?
The process culminated in a final sale price of $32.5 million.
$32.5 million.
Yeah.
Because let's compare that. If a basic, non-competitive offer might have been, say, $25 million, it's a $7.5 million increase.
A huge increase, roughly 30% higher than a potential baseline valuation.
And let's connect it back to the EBITDA multiple. The business had $3 million in EBITDA. That $32.5 million price represents a multiple of nearly 11x EBITDA.
But more importantly, let's look at the premium generated by the process. The difference between a potential $25 ALMO initial offer and the final $32 5 ounce is $7.05. Now let's check our rule of thumb. What's 1.25 times the $3 million EBITDA?
1.25 times $3 million is $3.75 million.
Right. So the advisor didn't just get a good price, they generated a strategic premium well in excess of that typical 1.25 back EBITDA uplift. In this case, it was even higher, closer to 2.5 back EBITDA added value. $7.05 premium, $3 million EBITDA. The process demonstrably created millions in additional value.
That case study really drives it home. Going direct might have netted $25 million. Running the professional process netted $32.5 million. The advisor fee, maybe $300K, $400K on that larger deal, was dwarfed by the extra $7.5 million achieved.
Exactly. That's the power of structure, strategy, and leveraging competitive tension. The process is the product when it comes to maximizing value in M&A.
The takeaway here feels incredibly clear for any owner of a Canadian business in that $10 million to $50 million range. The value an experienced M&A advisor brings isn't just administrative paperwork.
Not at all. It's strategic insight. It's negotiation leverage built on understanding industry dynamics and buyer psychology. It's process discipline that ensures confidentiality and maximizes competitive pressure. It's risk mitigation on deal terms. And ultimately, it translates into that quantifiable financial uplift, that 1.25 my EBITDA premium, or often even more.
So let's try to synthesize the core advice for an owner listening right now, maybe someone who's recently received that unsolicited call or is just thinking about the future exit for their $10, $50 business.
I think it boils down to this. You've likely spent decades building this company. It represents immense personal effort and family wealth. Don't fumble the most important financial transaction of your life by trying to save a relatively small fee.
The moment that unsolicited approach happens from a rival, supplier, customer, or a management, that's the trigger. That's the moment the clock starts ticking on maximizing value.
And the single most important decision you'll make right then and there is whether to engage an expert M&A advisor immediately. That decision is fundamentally the choice between potentially leaving millions on the table versus running a professional process designed to capture the absolute maximum value for your life's work.
The advisor's fee isn't the cost. The real cost is the value you lose by not having them orchestrate the competition and leverage those bidder fears effectively. That 1.25 by EBITDA multiplier is the prize, and it vastly outweighs the cost of admission.
And maybe think about it this way. There's a huge difference between simply selling your business, basically taking the first reasonable offer that comes along, and truly maximizing a return on what is likely your family's single most valuable asset. Achieving that maximum return requires a deliberate, structured, competitive process. It doesn't happen by accident.
It's about securing the generational wealth that your hard work and risk-taking deserve. That feels like a powerful final thought. The process really is the product.
Well said.
Now, the detailed insights, the strategic framework, and that specific case study we discussed today, they were drawn from resources and expertise provided by the Shaughnessy Group.
Yes, their work in this specific market segment provides a really valuable roadmap for owners navigating these complex situations.
So we definitely want to extend our gratitude. We want to thank the Shaughnessy Group for this useful information and for sharing their insights, which formed the basis for our deep dive today.
Absolutely. Their focus on maximizing value for owners in this lower middle market is crucial.
And if you, the listener, find yourself in this position or want to learn more about these strategies to prepare for that eventual unsolicited opportunity, you should check out their resources.
Definitely worth exploring further.
You can visit their website for more strategic insights at www.shaughnessy.group. That's www.shaughnessy.group. Okay, I think that brings us to the end of this deep dive. Some really critical takeaways for business owners today.
Hopefully very helpful for navigating that critical moment.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us. We'll talk to you next time.